A very good morning to you. It is time for PRBites once again on the Public Relations Podcast feed. This is the feed. If you're new to this, if you stumbled across this today, this is where I'm going to be reading out the newsletter that comes out twice a week. But also on the Public Relations Podcast, we have chats as well. So I've got a chat coming out tomorrow with an agency in New York. I'll talk about in a few seconds' time. And also we've got the new panel show coming up too, where we've got agencies talking about particular questions for organizations, how to deal with them, and kind of coming up with strategies too. But anyway, all that sort of stuff on the feed. But in the meantime, let me start reading PRBites for you. And what is it? It's Tuesday, the 10th of September. So the three main kind of headlines that I put at the top of the newsletter today. The first one is, how would you turn around the image of a fast food chain? You know, fast food often doesn't have a very good rep. So how would you turn around the image of it? Next one was something that was highlighted in a chat I had with a politician last night. And finally, why Story has made the Ultimate Fighting Championship so successful in the United States. Starting off, though, with the It's Happening Now section. So over the past couple of days, there's been a story about the temporary England soccer boss, Lee Carsley, saying he won't sing the national anthem before games. And indeed, there's little videos online of him not singing when everyone else is. An interesting thing about this from a comms point of view is that it's a classic clickbait story if you break it down. You know, whatever you think about the issue, that's kind of irrelevant with the Public Relations Podcast. We talk about technique. So firstly, it's easy to grasp. It's a really easy story to grasp. Wherever you are in the world, you could probably have an opinion immediately when you hear the point. It's easy to form a strong opinion, as I say. There's really only an I agree or I disagree response. So a very simple response that you can come up with. It's not nuanced, it's straightforward. Both sides, whichever position you're going to be on, are probably going to feel a little bit threatened by the other people's point of view. And it triggers an emotional response right across the board because it's all about emotion. You know, it's not something which is specific to your life. It's not going to affect you whichever way you feel, which means that you can feel as passionate about it as you like because it's not actually going to impact you. I mean, Carsley has explained his actions, but no one is paying particular attention to that, as it's, you know, when he explains his actions, the story goes from being this simplistic black and white story to being more nuanced and more, you know, shades of grey. And that complicates the processing of the narrative in people's minds. It makes it harder to explain in a Twitter, and it makes it more challenging. So if you're not, actually, this is a good example of how to sort of see this in action. If you're not from Britain, next time you meet a Brit, ask them this question, okay? Most Brits will have had a cream tea at some point. Ask them whether the jam or the cream should go on the scone first. Or here's another example. Ask an Italian or say to an Italian that you would like pineapple on your pizza. The point is that it's easy to grasp. It's easy to form a strong opinion. There's really only two answers, yes or no. And that's what makes for a good clickbaity story, doesn't it? It's stuff that we can apply to our own work. Next one, I spotted section. And this is actually a good example of why your skills are needed as a PR or comms person today. And it's an example from the world of sport. Now, if you don't know it, Dana White runs the UFC, which is the Ultimate Fighting Championship, a huge sort of mixed martial arts competition, particularly in the United States. And I personally don't watch it myself much, but a video popped up on YouTube the other day that caught my eye. And it was about fighters trying to enter the championship. And Dana very much has the final say over who gets in. And he was offering contracts to those who impressed him. And what stood out was how he focused on one particular fighter, this young woman from a very tough background. You know, she'd had family struggles. She'd been abused, the kind of story that kind of pulls you in. And Dana kept saying, I love your story. I love your story. And you could see the genuine excitement in his eyes around the story. And if we strip away the story, in quotes, from UFC, what do we actually have? Just another combat sport, right? There are lots of combat sports out there. So what is making this particular one stand out? Like any product, campaign, or PR effort, it's the story. In this particular case, that story fits well with the audience demographic. It's the rags to riches. It's the overcoming adversity. It's the showing respect. These are things that are often going to resonate with the UFC, which is a largely, and okay, I'm stereotyping it, very much simplifying here, but a largely blue-collar demographic. And when you look at the data, UFC has more consistent event revenue, strong regular earnings, huge fan engagement, enormous social media audience, and engagement compared to boxing. And why is that? Because one tells a better story. When someone says to us, we don't need PR, there's another example to say why you do. It's another example to add to the toolbox to explain why they absolutely do need storytelling if you want a product, a brand, or an organization to be standing out, particularly now in the new era of marketing. The next section in the newsletter was called Updates, and this was about a chat I had last night. So I found myself on WhatsApp, and I was having a bit of a back and forth with a politician, and I won't say who this was, but it's not something that I've worked with directly before. But like all politicians, they go in and out of public and media consciousness. And right now, things are relatively quiet. But, with politics, anything can happen, right? And if it does, we were joking that they would suddenly be labeled as a senior or a key politician in that party. That would be the title, senior ex-party member, blah, 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 their name. And we were laughing about this and thinking, well, it would probably actually go further. Maybe then they'd suddenly become a divisive senior politician in this party, or, seems to be kind of more in vogue these days, a controversial senior politician in the party. And this conversation really struck me because it's something worth discussing, because I think if I think back to my editorial days, right, when I was doing it, the words that go in front of a name do have a big impact on the success of a story, because they are literally telling the listener, in my particular case on radio, or the reader, or the audience, whether this is going out from an influencer, why they should care about this person you're talking to. Some media outlets are obviously absolute masters of this. A good example would be this. You might hear about a minor court case involving someone who would be an absolute nobody in any other context, but the moment you label them as the nephew of X TV celebrity, suddenly there's a reason to care. Another way, but let me give an example, okay? Imagine you're working for a pharmaceutical company that's just developed a life-saving drug. Which quote would grab you most out of these two? Would it be this one? So, our team will change people's lives, says Jane Smith, CEO of a drug company. Or B, we realized immediately this was going to change people's lives, says Jane Smith, the scientist who discovered the breakthrough genetic code. Hopefully my intonation didn't influence you too much there, but most people would be far more interested in hearing from the scientists who discovered the breakthrough genetic code. So summing up, the point is not to forget to tell people why they should care when crafting content or pitching a story. It may be obvious to you and your organization. I think this is often the problem, but not to a journalist or influencer. So don't bury that detail in a bio or the third paragraph, in your release. I'm sure I've said this before, but when I used to look at press releases in the old days, you basically, when you look, if the top line didn't grab you, you'd go roughly 2/3 of the way down in the press release, and you generally find the actual story there. As an aside, the point is, don't bury the reason why you should care about these people or this story in the third paragraph or in the bio. Highlight it in those few words before their name. If you think about yourself, literally you right now, as you're listening to this, right? And you think if you had to put like 2 or 3 words in front of your name to sum up your skills and your ability, your experience, what words would you use? Sums it up. Right, moving on. Tip from a guest. A quick one from Seth Linden, who's going to be on the podcast tomorrow. Seth Linden's from Dukas Linden PR in New York. And it's a great little chat. I think one of my highlights is probably where he's talking about the way that society is changing in the United States where he is, and how that is changing the way that PR has to be done, and particularly when he's working in the financial and the business services space. Companies are constantly having to adapt to the political overtones that are coming down. So it's quite interesting. It's really interesting. We talk about all kinds of things like AI and influence on PR as well, but that's coming out tomorrow. But one tip that I grabbed out of it, and it actually ties in quite nicely to a Reddit thread I was reading the other day, where PRs were complaining about how fast journalists are moving these days. And Seth's take on it was this. In essence, quite a blunt sort of tip. And that is that you've just got to accept that journalists are constantly chasing trends today to stay relevant. They're doing it as well as every other social media person or PR person. They need to talk about what people are talking about online. So the news cycle is no longer about watching what other newsrooms do at 5 a.m. in the morning so they can set the agenda for the day. It's about seeing what people are talking about this hour and next hour. And that makes things more sporadic. And with fewer journalists around, also, you haven't got as many beat reporters by a long way now. So they might have 15 minutes to research a story. And if you're there at that right moment, or when they make the call or they email you, that's your window of opportunity. If you're not there, there's every chance you've missed it, even if you've got a really good story. So Seth's advice really was make sure you're online, be ready, and know what is trending as well yourself so that you can get in there second it's happening and get in there fast, because that's how fast newsrooms are moving now. But anyway, lots more on that in the podcast episode tomorrow. Okay, just one more thing in the newsletter for today and in PR Bites as I read it aloud to you here, and that is our PR puzzle of the day. So settle back. Wherever you're on the train or in the car, here's something to have a think about. Just imagine then, you got a new job and you are managing PR for a national chain of quick service or fast food, whatever you want to call it, seafood restaurants. And the perception often with seafood from fast food restaurants is that it's kind of lower quality, unhealthy, and not fresh compared to dining at higher end establishments. And you've been brought in to turn around that public perception and get them to adopt the message that fast seafood can be fresh, delicious, and sustainable. So you've got two choices to do this. Fast seafood can be fresh, delicious, and sustainable. I'm going to go for option one, which is to launch a catch-to-counter campaign featuring short online videos and social media stories of the sustainable fishing process involved. So, in other words, from ocean to the restaurant, and emphasizing the freshness and the ethical sourcing. Or do you go for option two, create a pop-up seafood restaurant in a major city? So find a restaurant with an expired lease and get a short-term rental or something like that. Then serve the fish and chips from your normal shop, but on proper plates with knives and forks and a nice presentation at this other place. And invite influencers. Don't say anything about the original shop. Invite influencers, local press, etc. And then also mix this with a story about a new recipe that makes fish and chips better, tastier, and healthier, and encourage people to try that challenge. What would you do? I think it's pretty obvious from the sound of my voice, which I would go for. I would definitely go for option two. And the reason I personally would do this, and I'd be interested to know what you think, is that, while option one is very much more dependable, it's a safer option, isn't it? It's going to generate reusable content as well. There's already so much of that sort of material out there. You could go all in and film it well, and if you did, you might need to get an expensive crew as well. If you're trying to film it in a documentary style, you got to think about travel with fishing ports, on boats, insurance, and all this kind of thing. Now, option two isn't going to be cheap either. You've still got to think about some of those things, definitely, like insurance, for example. But there is certainly more room to be creative and, in turn, get noticed. So, in my eyes, we're setting up this pop-up. We're then going to deliver the food without telling anyone from the normal restaurant. Now, that's going to be good on itself. It's going to be quirky, but you can magnify that by building it up then by having this sort of revolutionary new batter to coat the fish in, or a healthier or a tastier oil. And then you turn the whole thing into a challenge. Bring in influencers, journalists, and the public to taste it and decide for themselves. Now, okay, sure, there's more risk involved with people not liking it compared to the videos, but it's also far more likely to get people talking and generating a buzz. And it has the potential to spread much, much wider, I think, than just a few videos which are going to get lost in the noise. To have that sort of taste test and to have that revolutionary new batter or healthier way of making food is going to make for quite a strong, entertaining story that people are going to want to come and try out and do the taste test in there. What would you do, though? That's just my views. And we have these scenarios in each one of these newsletters, and I'm always interested to hear what you would do, how you would approach it as well. Obviously, I'm only giving two choices when I do it, because just for speed, otherwise we could go on forever. But I would be interested to know how you would approach these if you had a third option in there. So that's it for today. That's PR Bites. Do you know anyone who should be getting this newsletter? If so, make sure you go to thepublicrelationspodcast.com and get them to click on the newsletter button. It is that simple, where they can fill in their details in there. Or, of course, they can listen to the podcast episode, me reading it aloud, right here on any good podcast app, as people always say. I think that's it for the moment. I will be back tomorrow with Seth Linden's chat, and back on Thursday as well with another PR Bites. But in the meantime, if you want to reach out to me, you are always welcome to. I always love hearing from people and hearing your ideas. You can reach me on LinkedIn at Richard Midson, which is Midson. Connect with me there. Let's have a quick chat. Midson. Seth Linden is the interview tomorrow. My name is Richard Midson, Midson. And there's so much more I could talk about. I'm going to round it up for now. Have an absolutely awesome day. If you want to get in contact with me, let me know. But in the meantime, I will speak to you tomorrow and the day after that as well. Speak to you soon. Bye.